I'm Madison Reynolds, 37, and watching my brother Ryan turn ghost white in the resort's conference room was worth every penny of my secret investment. I have a buyer willing to pay $950,000 for your little beach condo, he'd announced smugly at Mom's birthday dinner last week, waving papers he'd forged with my signature. He didn't know I'd been anonymously buying the struggling Sapphire Bay Resort property for 3 years. Now, as the resort's owner, I slid the real property deed across the table. You can't sell what's mine, especially to a developer planning to demolish it. Surprise, little brother. Before I dive into how my brother's greed led to the most satisfying moment of my life, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments. If you've ever dealt with family betrayal or watched karma deliver the perfect lesson, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more true family drama stories like mine. Now, let me tell you how my brother's scheme completely backfired. I grew up in a modest 2-story colonial in suburban Connecticut, where the Reynolds family appeared picture-perfect from the outside. My parents, Diana and Michael Reynolds, now 65 and 67, always prioritized family image over addressing the underlying issues that would eventually fracture us. Our childhood photos show Ryan and me with matching grins, just 3 years apart and seemingly inseparable. Those early years were genuinely happy. Ryan would follow me everywhere, and I'd patiently teach him everything from tying his shoes to riding a bike. As the older sibling, I naturally fell into the protector role. Mom still has videos of 7-year-old me holding Ryan's hand as we crossed streets or comforting him when he scraped his knee at the playground. We were the textbook definition of sibling harmony. Things began shifting when we entered our teenage years. I remained studious and responsible, while Ryan discovered his natural charisma could get him out of almost any situation. He'd charm teachers into extending deadlines, talk his way out of detentions, and most importantly, wrap our parents around his finger. Ryan's just spirited, Mom would say after he'd broken another household rule. Dad would nod in agreement. Boys will be boys. This became their mantra, a convenient excuse that never required actual accountability. Meanwhile, I was held to impossibly high standards, expected to be the mature one regardless of circumstances. The first major fracture in our relationship came when our grandmother Evelyn passed away during my senior year of high school. She had always appreciated my responsible nature, and to everyone's surprise, left me a small inheritance of $25,000, specifically earmarked for education. It wasn't a fortune, but it helped cover my first 2 years of college expenses. Ryan was furious. Why didn't she leave me anything? He demanded at the reading of the will. He was only 15, but the entitlement in his voice shocked everyone in the room. My parents, rather than explaining Grandma's choice, immediately promised to set aside an equivalent amount for his future. Their attempt to keep peace only reinforced his expectation that the world should bend to accommodate his desires. Despite the inheritance helping with initial expenses, I still worked part-time throughout my undergraduate years and took out loans for my MBA program. Those years taught me financial independence and discipline. Meanwhile, Ryan coasted through a state college with our parents covering his expenses, including the apartment he trashed during wild parties and the car he wrecked while driving impaired. After completing my MBA, I seized an opportunity with a tech investment firm in San Francisco. The distance from Connecticut provided unexpected relief from the family dynamics that had become increasingly strained. In California, I was judged on my merits rather than compared to my brother. My analytical skills and work ethic propelled me quickly up the corporate ladder, and by my early 30s, I was managing significant investment portfolios and earning well into 6 figures. Ryan stayed in Connecticut, reluctantly joining a local real estate agency where our father had connections. His work history consisted of bursts of enthusiasm followed by months of minimal effort. He'd close a few impressive deals when motivated by a luxury purchase, then coast on those commissions until funds ran low. Despite this pattern, at family gatherings, my parents would praise his entrepreneurial spirit and people skills while politely acknowledging my stable job. Our adult relationship settled into a superficial politeness that masked deeper tensions. I'd fly home for major holidays and our parents' birthdays, where Ryan would invariably make subtle digs about my boring corporate life or how I was married to my job. After my brief marriage to Derek ended in divorce 2 years ago, Ryan added failed relationship to his arsenal of passive-aggressive commentary. I maintained peace by limiting my responses, knowing any confrontation would cast me as the villain in my parents' eyes. "Why can't you just get along with your brother?" Mom would ask whenever I expressed frustration with his behavior. "He looks up to you, you know." This revisionist history became easier to tolerate from 3,000 miles away, where I was building a life based on my own values rather than family expectations. The unspoken competition between us continued, with Ryan visibly bristling whenever my career milestones or financial security were mentioned. My parents remained oblivious, continuing to host elaborate birthday dinners and holiday gatherings where we'd perform the roles of loving siblings for a few hours before returning to our separate lives. What none of them knew was how much I'd truly achieved or how carefully I managed my finances and investments. I kept those details private, sharing only what was necessary to avoid additional friction. Little did I realize that my privacy would eventually set the stage for Ryan's most audacious betrayal yet. 5 years ago, my life changed direction during what should have been a routine business trip. I was in Southern California evaluating a potential investment in a tech startup, and with the meetings concluding earlier than expected, I decided to drive up the coast rather than immediately flying back to San Francisco. That impulsive decision led me to Sapphire Bay, a sleepy coastal town that hadn't yet been transformed by luxury developments or tourist traps. The moment I drove down the main street with its locally owned shops and unpretentious restaurants, something inside me relaxed. People nodded as they passed each other on the sidewalk. No one seemed in a hurry. After years of high-pressure decisions and constant connectivity, the change of pace felt like stepping into another dimension. I checked into the Sapphire Bay Resort, an aging but charming property right on the beachfront. The resort had clearly seen better days. The lobby furniture was slightly worn, the paint was fading in spots, but the staff greeted me with genuine warmth rather than rehearsed hospitality scripts. "Just one night?" asked Jessica, the front desk manager, as she processed my check-in. "For now," I replied, already feeling reluctant to leave. That evening, I walked barefoot along the shore, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors no digital screen could capture. For the first time in years, I wasn't checking my phone every few minutes or mentally reviewing tomorrow's meetings. I was simply present. The next morning, I extended my stay for the weekend. By Sunday, I'd noticed a for sale sign outside a ground-floor condo unit in the resort's residential wing. On impulse, I called the number. The real estate agent showed me the 2-bedroom condo with obvious enthusiasm, but without the pushy sales tactics I'd grown accustomed to. The unit wasn't particularly luxurious. It had original 1,980 seconds cabinetry and dated bathroom fixtures, but the wall-to-wall windows facing the ocean made those details insignificant. Standing in the living room, watching waves crash against the shore just yards away, I felt an immediate connection that no ultra-luxury San Francisco apartment had ever inspired. "The owners are motivated to sell," the agent explained. "They've had it in the family for decades, but their children moved east and they're looking to downsize." The asking price of $575,000 was substantial but well within my means. Even more importantly, it represented something I'd been missing, a place that existed solely for my enjoyment rather than as an investment or status symbol. I made an offer that afternoon, and within 3 weeks, I had the keys to my personal sanctuary. The condo became my retreat from the high-stress world of tech investing. I'd fly down at least one weekend a month, gradually replacing the outdated fixtures while maintaining the condo's unpretentious charm. I chose comfortable furniture that could withstand sandy feet and installed bookshelves that soon filled with novels I'd been meaning to read for years. Each visit, I'd leave my laptop closed for longer stretches, rediscovering hobbies and simple pleasures that had been sacrificed to my career. I also began forming connections within the community. Walter, my 76-year-old neighbor, taught me the local fishing spots and shared stories of Sapphire Bay before developers discovered its potential. Jessica from the front desk introduced me to her weekly beach yoga group. Gradually, I shifted from being a visitor to becoming part of the community's fabric. When my marriage to Derek unraveled 2 years ago, the condo became even more significant. What had started as a vacation property transformed into emotional sanctuary. While our divorce was relatively amicable, no children involved, a clear prenup in place, it still left me questioning aspects of my life I'd taken for granted. At Sapphire Bay, surrounded by people who knew me as Madison rather than Miss Reynolds from the investment firm, I found space to heal and recalibrate. I rarely mentioned the condo to my family back east. During our occasional phone calls or holiday gatherings, I'd reference my place in California without specifying I now had 2 properties. This wasn't intentional deception so much as a continuation of my lifelong habit of keeping personal matters private. My parents had never shown interest in visiting California, citing the long flight and their preference for familiar surroundings. Ryan occasionally made remarks about must be nice when I mentioned taking time off, but never expressed actual curiosity about my life on the West Coast. In retrospect, I should have noticed Ryan's increasing questions about that beach place during our interactions last year. What seemed like casual conversation was actually reconnaissance. During his only visit to California for a real estate convention 3 years ago, he'd spent one night at my San Francisco apartment, but had declined my invitation to see the condo, claiming his schedule was too packed. Now I understand he was already forming his plan even then. As property values along the California coast continued rising, I invested in thoughtful upgrades to the condo, a kitchen renovation that opened the space to better capture ocean views, modern bathrooms that still retained beach cottage charm, and energy-efficient windows that would withstand coastal storms while reducing utility costs. These improvements were for my enjoyment rather than future profit, but they nonetheless increased the property's value significantly. What I didn't realize then was how my personal haven would soon become the centerpiece of a family betrayal I couldn't have imagined, and how my private financial decisions would ultimately provide the perfect countermove to my places as Levin Media's brother's scheme. About 3 years ago, during one of my regular weekend getaways to the condo, I noticed an unusual tension among the resort staff. The typically cheerful maintenance workers avoided eye contact, and Jessica's smile seemed forced when I greeted her at the front desk. Something had clearly shifted in the atmosphere of my peaceful retreat. That evening, while walking back from dinner at my favorite local seafood restaurant, I passed the resort's administrative offices. The windows were still lit despite the late hour, and raised voices carried through the partially opened door. "We can't hold off Preston much longer," a man's voice insisted. "The bank won't extend again, and we're already behind on property taxes." "There has to be another option," Jessica responded, her voice strained. "His development would destroy everything that makes Sapphire Bay special." I continued walking, not wanting to eavesdrop further, but their conversation nagged at me throughout the night. The next morning, I casually asked Walter about the resort's situation during our regular coffee on my balcony. His weathered face fell. "Bad business, Madison. The Murphys have owned this place for 30 years, but tourism's been declining since that fancy resort opened in the next town. That developer Preston Harrington has been circling like a shark, wants to demolish everything and build luxury condos that nobody local could afford." "But what about the existing condos? The ones like mine?" I asked. Walter shook his head. "His plan would force everyone out eventually. The new association fees alone would price out most owners, and the businesses in town that depend on moderate-priced tourism would collapse." This information transformed my perspective overnight. My condo wasn't just my personal retreat, it was part of an ecosystem that supported dozens of local families and small businesses. The thought of watching Sapphire Bay transform into another soulless luxury development made my stomach turn. That afternoon, I approached Jessica directly. "I overheard something last night about the resort's financial situation," I admitted. "How bad is it?" Jessica hesitated, then sighed heavily. "We shouldn't burden guests with these problems." "I'm not just a guest," I replied. "This place has become my second home. I'd like to understand what's happening." Over the next hour, Jessica outlined the resort's precarious position. The Murphy family had been running the resort since the 1992, gradually adding the residential condos as a way to stabilize income during tourism's seasonal fluctuations. But the economic downturn a decade ago, followed by increasing competition from chain hotels, had created a perfect storm of financial challenges. Deferred maintenance had further damaged their competitive position, creating a downward spiral of declining occupancy and revenue. Preston Harrington's development company had been strategically purchasing nearby properties for years, waiting for the perfect moment to acquire the resort, the crown jewel of beachfront real estate in Sapphire Bay. His most recent offer had been $4.3 million, significantly below market value but tempting to owners facing possible foreclosure. "The Murphys don't want to sell," Jessica explained, "but they're running out of options. The bank is threatening foreclosure within 6 months." This situation resonated with my professional experience. At my investment firm, I specialized in identifying distressed assets with turnaround potential. The difference here was my personal connection to the property and community. After returning to San Francisco, I found myself researching Sapphire Bay Resort's financial situation rather than focusing on work projects. I created financial models, analyzed local tourism trends, and evaluated potential paths to profitability. What started as curiosity evolved into a detailed business case that showed the resort could become financially sustainable with the right investments and management improvements. 2 weeks later, I returned to Sapphire Bay and requested a meeting with the Murphy family. Tom and Elizabeth Murphy, now in their early 70s, welcomed me into their modest office with obvious confusion. "You're the owner from Unit 115, right?" Tom asked. "Is there a problem with your condo?" "No problems," I assured them. "I'm here about the resort situation. I understand Preston Harrington is pressuring you to sell." Their surprise at my knowledge quickly gave way to resignation. "Word travels fast in small towns," Elizabeth said with a sad smile. "I have a different perspective to offer," I said, opening my laptop to show them my analysis. "In my day job, I manage investments for a San Francisco firm. I've developed a potential path forward that doesn't involve selling to Harrington." For the next hour, I walked them through my findings: strategic renovations that would improve revenue without sacrificing character, marketing approaches targeting experience-focused travelers rather than competing with luxury chains on amenities, and operational efficiencies that could improve margins without sacrificing service quality. "This is impressive," Tom admitted, "but it would require substantial capital investment money we simply don't have." "What if someone else provided that investment?" I asked. "Someone who values Sapphire Bay exactly as it is?" The conversation that followed lasted well into the evening as we explored a potential partnership structure. I proposed creating a holding company that would purchase majority ownership, inject capital for renovations, and allow the Murphys to retain operational involvement while relieving their debt burden. Most importantly, the resort's character and community connections would be preserved. "Why would you do this?" Elizabeth asked finally. "This isn't just a business decision for you, is it?" I explained how Sapphire Bay had become my sanctuary, how the community had welcomed me, and how I'd come to value the authentic experience that was increasingly rare along the California coast. "I'm not interested in maximizing short-term profits," I told them. "I'm investing in a place that matters to me and to all the people who depend on this resort." Over the next several months, we worked through due diligence, negotiations with creditors, and complex legal structures. I created Blue Horizon LLC, a private entity that would hide my personal involvement not out of deception, but because I wanted to maintain my privacy and normal relationships within the community. The final deal provided the Murphys with debt relief and a minority ownership stake, while giving me controlling interest and decision-making authority for major changes. 3 months ago, after extensive negotiations with banks and creditors, we finalized the transaction. For $5.8 million invested through my LLC, I became the majority owner of Sapphire Bay Resort, including its hotel operations, restaurant, and common areas. The Murphys stayed on as operational consultants, their institutional knowledge invaluable to the transition. Only Jessica and the Murphys knew about my involvement, as I insisted on keeping my investment confidential. I wanted to be treated normally by staff and community members, not as the owner. Besides, my vision for renovations involved careful community input, which would be more authentic if people didn't feel pressured to agree with the person signing their paychecks. What none of us anticipated was how quickly Preston Harrington would shift strategies once the resort was no longer available for purchase. Within weeks of our deal closing, he began approaching individual condo owners with aggressive offers, hoping to gain control through piecemeal acquisitions. I monitored these developments with growing concern, but remained confident in our community's resilience. Then my brother Ryan entered the picture, unwittingly setting in motion a confrontation that would expose his true character and change our family dynamic forever. Last month, I flew back to Connecticut for my mother's 65th birthday celebration. Despite my complicated feelings about family gatherings, milestone birthdays were non-negotiable events in the Reynolds household. I'd arranged my work schedule to allow for a 4-day weekend, enough time to participate in the festivities while minimizing the potential for conflict with Ryan. Mom and Dad's house looked exactly as it always had, meticulously maintained colonial with seasonal wreaths and perfectly trimmed hedges. The familiarity was both comforting and stifling as I wheeled my suitcase up the front walk. Mom greeted me with the usual comments about my weight, too thin, my work schedule, too busy, and my love life, non-existent since the divorce. I handed her a small gift bag containing a Tiffany bracelet, saving the envelope with documents for the European river cruise I'd booked for both my parents for the actual birthday dinner. The house gradually filled with extended family throughout the afternoon. Aunt Carol arrived with her signature casserole, Cousin Amber showed off pictures of her new baby, and Uncle Steve settled in front of the TV to watch baseball. The familiar choreography of family gatherings unfolded predictably, with everyone slipping into their assigned roles with practiced ease. Ryan was predictably late, arriving just as Mom was beginning to worry and Dad was beginning to fume. He burst through the front door with theatrical flair, his new girlfriend Brittany in tow. She was at least 10 years younger than him, with a designer handbag that I recognized as costing well above what Ryan should have been able to afford on his inconsistent real estate income. "Happy birthday, Mom," he announced, presenting her with an enormous bouquet and air-kissing both her cheeks. "Sorry we're late, closing on the Henderson property ran long. You know how it is when you're dealing with million-dollar listings." Mom beamed at him as though he'd announced a Nobel Prize rather than a routine professional task. "My successful children," she said, pulling both of us into a photo opportunity. Madison with her fancy finance job and Ryan making his mark in luxury real estate. I maintained my smile while silently noting Ryan's new Rolex, definitely not in his legitimate price range unless something had dramatically changed in his career. Financial irresponsibility had always been his pattern, but this level of spending seemed extreme even for him. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, with Mom's best china and crystal glasses lending the appropriate ceremonial atmosphere to the occasion. Conversation flowed predictably through family updates, local gossip, and mild political disagreements, quickly redirected by Mom's skilled social navigation. After the main course, but before dessert, Mom's favorite part of any meal, I presented the envelope containing the river cruise documentation. "For both of you," I explained. 2 weeks exploring European capitals next spring, all arrangements handled. The presidential suite has a private balcony for enjoying the scenery. My parents' genuine surprise and appreciation felt worthwhile despite the significant expense. Mom teared up slightly, and Dad cleared his throat in the way he did when emotions threatened to overwhelm his usual reserve. Even Ryan looked momentarily caught off guard by the generosity of the gift. That moment of family harmony was short-lived. As the server from the catering company brought in the birthday cake, a towering confection decorated with fondant roses, Ryan stood and tapped his water glass with a spoon. "I also have something special to announce," he said, his confident smile directed primarily toward me, "a surprise that will benefit my big sister Madison." The attention shift was immediate and complete, exactly as he'd intended. I felt a flutter of apprehension, recognizing the calculated glint in his eye. As you all know, Madison has that little beach condo in California that she barely has time to use with her busy corporate schedule. Ryan's voice carried the false concern I'd heard many times before. "Well, I've been working behind the scenes to help her maximize her investment." He reached into his jacket and removed a folder with a flourish. "I have a buyer willing to pay $950,000 for the property, almost double what she paid 5 years ago." The room erupted in impressed murmurs and congratulations. Ryan basked in the attention while I sat frozen, processing the implications of his announcement. How did he even know about potential buyers for my property? I hadn't listed it for sale. "That's so thoughtful," Mom exclaimed. "Isn't it, Madison? Your brother is looking out for you even from across the country." Ryan slid the folder across the table toward me. Inside were preliminary sale documents with what appeared to be my signature on several pages. my signature that I absolutely had not provided. I know you're too busy to handle these details, Ryan continued smoothly, so I took the liberty of showing the property while you were tied up with work. The buyer is extremely motivated and prepared to close quickly. I maintained a neutral expression through sheer force of will, years of high-stakes business negotiations finally serving a personal purpose. That's quite a surprise, I managed. Who's the buyer? Preston Harrington Development Group, Ryan replied, pronouncing the name as though it should impress me. They're major players in coastal luxury properties. They have cash in hand and can close in 30 days. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Preston Harrington, the same developer who had been trying to acquire the resort. My condo was another piece in his collection strategy, and somehow my brother had become his unwitting accomplice, or worse, his willing co-conspirator. It's really a tremendous opportunity, Ryan continued, addressing the entire table with the practiced charm of a seasoned salesman. They're planning an exclusive development that will completely transform that tired old resort. Your unit would be the first acquisition in their beachfront collection. The commission is substantial, of course, but I'm more excited about helping my sister maximize her investment. I excused myself to make a phone call, stepping onto the back patio where generations of Reynolds family members had retreated during moments of tension. With shaking hands, I called Jessica at the resort. Has my brother been showing my condo to potential buyers? I asked without preamble. Jessica's hesitation told me everything before she spoke. I'm so sorry, Madison. He said he had your power of attorney. He had keys and documentation that seemed legitimate. He's brought the same gentleman through 3 times in the past month. I thanked her and ended the call, leaning against the porch railing as I gathered my thoughts. The magnitude of Ryan's deception was staggering: forged signatures, unauthorized property showings, and collusion with a developer I'd specifically acted against. Yet confronting him during Mom's birthday celebration would create exactly the type of family drama I'd spent years avoiding. Taking a deep breath, I returned to the dining room with a decision made. I would play along temporarily, gathering evidence and preparing a response that would ensure Ryan faced appropriate consequences without turning my mother's milestone birthday into a battlefield. It's certainly an impressive offer, I said, rejoining the celebration as Mom was cutting the cake. We can discuss the details after the party. Tonight is about celebrating Mom. Ryan looked momentarily disappointed at being denied his dramatic moment, but recovered quickly. Of course! We have plenty of time to handle the paperwork. The buyers aren't going anywhere. If only he knew how wrong he was about that and about so many other things. As I accepted a slice of birthday cake and rejoined the family conversation, I was already formulating a plan that would teach my brother a lesson he would never forget. The morning after Mom's birthday celebration, I booked the earliest flight back to California, explaining to my disappointed parents that an urgent work situation required my immediate attention. It wasn't entirely a lie, the situation was indeed urgent, though not related to my official job. During the 6-hour flight, I compiled everything I knew about Ryan's scheme and identified the critical gaps in my understanding. How had he gained access to my condo? What documentation had he forged? Was this fraud limited to unauthorized showings, or had he taken steps toward an actual transaction? Most importantly, what was his relationship with Preston Harrington? Landing in San Francisco, I didn't even stop at my apartment. I drove directly to my office, where I had access to secure resources and professional contacts that would be essential for what came next. My assistant was surprised to see me on what should have been a vacation day, but I brushed off her questions with a vague explanation about a personal project. My first call was to Samantha Barnes, a private investigator I'd previously hired to conduct due diligence on potential investment targets. Her background in financial fraud investigation made her perfectly suited for the current situation. I need comprehensive surveillance and background research, I explained after outlining the basics. Timeline is extremely compressed days, not weeks. Family fraud cases are always the messiest, Samantha commented. I'll get started immediately. Next, I contacted Marcus Williams, the attorney who had structured my purchase of the resort. His expertise in real estate law and property fraud would be invaluable. Based on what you've described, we're looking at multiple potential crimes, Marcus said after hearing the details. Forgery, fraud, unauthorized access to property, and possibly wire fraud if he's received any deposits. Have you contacted the police? Not yet, I replied. I want to understand the full picture first, and honestly, I need to determine whether there's a path forward that doesn't involve having my brother arrested. Marcus's silence conveyed his professional disapproval of this approach, but he respected my decision. Let's gather evidence first, then discuss options. I'll prepare cease and desist orders and be ready to file for emergency injunctions if needed. With these professionals mobilized, I flew to Sapphire Bay the following morning. Jessica met me at the resort entrance, her face tight with concern. I feel terrible about this, she said as we walked to my condo. He seemed so legitimate, had your spare key, knew details about the property, even had what looked like notarized documents. This isn't your fault, I assured her. My brother can be very convincing when it serves his purposes. The security team provided access to footage covering the past 3 months of resort activity. There was Ryan, confidently escorting Preston Harrington through the property on multiple occasions, pointing out features with the practiced ease of a listing agent. In one particularly galling clip, he was showing off the kitchen renovations I'd recently completed, taking credit for design choices that had been exclusively mine. Jessica had compiled statements from staff who had interacted with Ryan during his visits. The front desk clerk recalled him specifically mentioning his power of attorney for his too-busy sister. The maintenance supervisor had been asked to provide access to mechanical rooms so Ryan could show Preston everything included in the sale. The resort's security guard remembered Ryan arriving early one morning to measure for renovations. While Samantha continued her investigation in Connecticut, I visited my neighbors to gather additional information. Walter confirmed that Ryan had introduced himself as my brother but claimed I'd given him the green light to handle the sale. Another neighbor mentioned overhearing Ryan tell Preston that I was eager to unload the property because I never had time to enjoy it. By the end of that first day, the outline of Ryan's scheme was becoming clear, but I still didn't understand his sudden connection to Preston Harrington or the extreme measures he'd taken. The answers came the following afternoon when Samantha called with her preliminary findings. Your brother is in serious financial trouble, she reported. Maxed out credit cards, 2 mortgages on his condo, gambling debts to some concerning individuals in Atlantic City, and 3 months behind on his car payments. The Rolex he's wearing? It's counterfeit. That explains the motivation, I said, but not the connection to Harrington. They met at a real estate convention in Las Vegas 4 months ago, Samantha continued. Based on their electronic communications, Harrington offered Ryan a 5% commission on any properties he could facilitate purchasing in Sapphire Bay. With a $950,000 sale price, that's $47,500, exactly the amount Ryan needs to cover his most pressing debts. The pieces were falling into place, but Samantha wasn't finished. There's more. I've accessed email exchanges between Ryan and Preston discussing your property. Ryan specifically told Preston you were an absentee owner who wouldn't notice if the price was below market value, and that you were too busy with your corporate job to pay attention to real estate matters. The betrayal stung more than I'd anticipated. It wasn't just that Ryan had attempted to sell my property without authorization, he'd actively disparaged me to facilitate the fraud. There's something else you should know, Samantha added, her tone softening slightly. Ryan has been monitoring your social media accounts and work schedule. He specifically timed the unauthorized showings for when he knew you'd be occupied with quarterly reviews or business trips. This level of calculation transformed my understanding of Ryan's actions. This wasn't an impulsive scheme born of financial desperation, it was a methodical betrayal that had been months in the planning. Samantha promised to send comprehensive documentation of her findings, including evidence of Ryan's financial distress, communications with Preston, and timeline of his activities related to my property. Marcus called later that evening with his assessment of the legal situation. You have multiple options, he explained. Criminal charges would likely result in felony convictions given the dollar amount involved. Civil action could recover damages and legal fees. Or we could leverage the evidence to force a settlement agreement that might salvage some family relationship if that's important to you. I thanked him for the overview and promised to decide on a course of action soon. That night, I sat on my condo's balcony watching the waves crash against the shore, wrestling with conflicting emotions. The evidence painted a picture of my brother that was difficult to reconcile with family loyalty. Yet the thought of pursuing criminal charges against my own brother, regardless of his actions, felt like crossing a line I wasn't prepared to traverse. By morning, I'd made my decision. Rather than immediately involving law enforcement, I would confront Ryan directly, but in a controlled environment that would leave no room for his usual manipulations or evasions. The perfect opportunity was already scheduled. Preston Harrington had arranged a final walkthrough of my condo for the following week, with Ryan serving as the facilitator. Instead of preventing this meeting, I decided to transform it into the stage for a long overdue reckoning. The confrontation would serve multiple purposes: stopping the fraudulent sale, exposing Ryan's deception, and making it clear to Preston Harrington that neither my property nor the resort was available for his development plans. As I finalized my strategy, I felt surprisingly calm. Years of managing high-stakes negotiations had prepared me for confrontation, but this situation was different. This wasn't about business, it was personal in a way that struck at the core of family trust, yet the evidence Samantha had gathered left no room for doubt or second-guessing. Ryan had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. I instructed Marcus to prepare all necessary legal documents, but hold them in reserve. I asked Jessica to arrange the conference room for what would appear to be a standard closing meeting, and I called the Murphys to briefly explain the situation, requesting their presence as witnesses to whatever unfolded. With all the pieces in place, I waited for Ryan to walk into the trap he'd set for himself. The week leading up to the confrontation passed in a blur of meticulous preparation. If I was going to expose Ryan's scheme effectively, every detail needed to be perfect. This wasn't just about stopping a fraudulent property sale, it was about creating a moment of truth that would be impossible for Ryan to manipulate or escape. Jessica proved invaluable in setting up the perfect scenario. As resort manager, she had access to all facilities and could arrange the meeting space exactly as I envisioned without raising suspicions. The main conference room is booked for what Preston thinks is the final sale meeting. She confirmed 3 days before the scheduled date. I've told them it's a courtesy since the transaction involves a resort property. We selected the large conference room with its impressive ocean views, a space typically reserved for corporate retreats and wedding receptions. The formal setting would immediately signal that this wasn't the casual closing Ryan was expecting. I've arranged the seating strategically, Jessica continued, showing me her diagram. Your chair at the head of the table, Ryan and Preston on the far side facing the door, and space for the witnesses along the side. The witnesses were carefully chosen. Tom and Elizabeth Murphy would attend as the resort's former owners, lending historical legitimacy to the proceedings. The resort's attorney would be present to address any legal questions that might arise. I also invited several local business owners whose livelihoods depended on the resort's continued operation, people who would be directly harmed by Preston's development plans. Should we notify your parents? Jessica asked hesitantly. I considered this briefly before shaking my head. Not yet. This needs to be handled directly between Ryan and me first. Bringing our parents into it would only complicate the dynamics. Security arrangements were equally important. I hired 2 plainclothes security professionals to be present but unobtrusive. Their presence wasn't about physical protection. Ryan had never been violent, but about ensuring the meeting couldn't be derailed by Ryan simply walking out when confronted. They'll position themselves near the exits, Samantha explained after vetting the security firm. Professional, discreet, but unmistakably present if needed. Marcus prepared comprehensive documentation, proving my ownership of both the condo and the resort. We'll have notarized copies of all relevant deeds, the LLC operating agreement showing your controlling interest, and certified bank records documenting the transactions, he assured me. No possible claim of misunderstanding or paperwork errors. I also arranged for the entire meeting to be legally recorded. California's 2-party consent law meant we would need to notify all participants at the beginning of the meeting, but I anticipated neither Ryan nor Preston would object to recording what they believed was a routine closing. The night before the confrontation, I found myself unable to sleep despite the exhausting days of preparation. Standing on my condo balcony, listening to the waves crash against the shore, I wrestled with doubts about my approach. Was I being unnecessarily theatrical? Should I have simply called Ryan directly when I first discovered his scheme? But every time I reconsidered, I remembered the calculated nature of his betrayal, the forged signatures, the disparaging comments to Preston, the months of planning. This wasn't an impulsive mistake deserving quiet correction. It was a deliberate attempt to profit from deceiving me, conducted with full awareness of the ethical and legal boundaries being crossed. Jessica found me still on the balcony at dawn, clutching a cold cup of coffee. "Second thoughts?" she asked gently. "Not about confronting him," I replied. "Just about how it might affect our family afterward. My parents have always been blind to his manipulations. This will be impossible for them to ignore." "Sometimes family dynamics need to be disrupted before they can heal," she observed. "From what you've told me, this pattern has continued for decades." She was right, of course. The uncomfortable truth was that by avoiding conflict with Ryan throughout adulthood, I'd enabled his behavior to continue unchecked. Perhaps this confrontation was necessary not just to stop the immediate fraud, but to finally address the dysfunctional family patterns that had allowed it to develop. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with deliberate care a tailored navy suit that projected confidence without ostentation, minimal jewelry, and hair pulled back in a simple chignon. My appearance would be businesslike rather than confrontational, giving no visual cues that might alert Ryan to the actual purpose of the meeting. Jessica called at 9:30 a.m. to confirm that everything was prepared in the conference room. "The documentation is arranged at your place at the table. Water and coffee service is set up. Security is in position. The Murphys and other witnesses will enter through the side door 5 minutes before the scheduled start time." "And there's been no communication from Ryan or Preston?" "None. As far as they know, this is proceeding as a normal closing. Preston's attorney called to confirm the time, but otherwise all is quiet." I thanked her and ended the call, taking a moment to center myself before leaving the condo. The weight of what I was about to do settled heavily on my shoulders. This confrontation would permanently alter my relationship with Ryan, for better or worse. There would be no going back to the superficial politeness that had characterized our adult interactions. Walking through the resort grounds toward the main building, I nodded to staff members going about their morning routines. None of them, except Jessica, knew that I was the resort's owner or that today's meeting would determine the future of their workplace. I'd maintained my anonymity through the Blue Horizon LLC structure specifically to preserve normal relationships with the community, a decision that now seemed prescient given Ryan's scheme. The conference room was perfectly prepared when I arrived. The large mahogany table gleamed in the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Place cards marked each position, with documents arranged precisely at each setting. A projector was ready to display electronic evidence if needed. Tom and Elizabeth Murphy arrived first, followed by the local business owners I'd invited. I greeted each person warmly, thanking them for their participation in what I described only as an important meeting about the resort's future. Their curious glances suggested they sensed something significant was about to happen, but they respected my minimal explanation. At 10:25, Jessica texted to inform me that Ryan and Preston had arrived in the lobby with Preston's attorney. The security personnel were in position and everything was ready. I took my seat at the head of the table, arranged the key documents in front of me, and prepared for the confrontation I'd been rehearsing in my mind for days. As the conference room door opened, I took a deep breath and reminded myself of what was at stake, not just my property, but the integrity of my life choices and the future of a community I'd grown to cherish. Whatever happened in the next hour would reshape multiple relationships permanently. I was ready. The conference room door swung open at precisely 10:30 a.m. Ryan entered first, exuding the confident swagger he'd perfected since childhood. He wore an expensive suit that undoubtedly exceeded his legitimate budget, his counterfeit Rolex catching the light as he gestured animatedly. Preston Harrington followed closely behind, a tall, silver-haired man whose tailored appearance screamed old money despite his nouveau rich development tactics. A younger man I assumed was Preston's attorney trailed behind them, clutching a leather portfolio. The moment Ryan spotted me sitting at the head of the table, he faltered mid-sentence. Confusion flickered across his face before he quickly recovered, plastering on his most charming smile. "Madison, what a surprise! I didn't realize you'd be joining us today." The forced casualness in his tone wouldn't have fooled anyone, let alone someone who had known him his entire life. Preston stepped forward, extending his hand. "Miss Reynolds, I presume?" "Preston Harrington. It's a pleasure to finally meet the owner of this charming property. Your brother has spoken highly of you." I stood and shook his hand firmly. "Mr. Harrington, I've certainly heard about you as well. though perhaps not in the context you'd imagine. Ryan laughed nervously, glancing around the room at the assembled witnesses. I thought this was just going to be a simple closing. What's with the audience? Please have a seat, I said, gesturing to the chairs on the opposite side of the table. This meeting is being recorded with the consent of all participants. If anyone objects, now is the time to say so. Ryan's eyes narrowed at this announcement, but neither he nor the others raised objections. They settled into their assigned seats, Preston and his attorney exchanging puzzled glances. I believe there's been a misunderstanding about today's purpose, I began, my voice steady and measured. This is not a closing meeting, because there is no sale taking place. What are you talking about? Ryan interjected. We've got the paperwork right here. The buyer is ready with funds. We just need signatures. Yes, let's talk about paperwork, I replied, sliding a folder across the table. Specifically, these documents bearing what appears to be my signature, a signature I never provided. Ryan's face flushed, but he maintained his composure. Madison, if you've changed your mind about selling, you could have just called me. No need for this. Production. I opened a second folder. These are statements from resort staff documenting your unauthorized access to my property over the past 3 months. You claim to have power of attorney, which was false. You conducted property showings without my knowledge or permission, which is illegal. Preston Harrington shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking between Ryan and me with growing concern. Mr. Reynolds assured me he had full authorization to handle this transaction. If there's been a miscommunication— It wasn't a miscommunication, I interrupted, opening a third folder. These are transcripts of emails between my brother and your office, in which he explicitly states that I'm an absentee owner who won't notice if the price is below market value. That doesn't sound like miscommunication. It sounds like deliberate deception. Ryan's composure cracked. Where did you get those? You had no right to access my emails. They were obtained legally as part of a fraud investigation, I replied calmly. Just as the financial records showing your extensive debts were obtained legally, the 5% commission on this sale would have covered your gambling losses in Atlantic City quite nicely, wouldn't it? The color drained from Ryan's face as he realized the extent of my knowledge. Preston Harrington's expression had transformed from confusion to anger, his attention now focused entirely on Ryan. You assured me this was a straightforward transaction, Preston said coldly. If I've been drawn into some kind of family fraud scheme— Mr. Harrington, I cut in, I suspect you're not entirely innocent in this situation. Your company has been systematically acquiring properties around Sapphire Bay Resort for the past 2 years, often using questionable tactics to pressure owners. My condo was simply another piece in that strategy. Preston straightened his tie, his demeanor shifting to defensive professionalism. My business practices are entirely legal, Miss Reynolds. If your brother misrepresented his authority, that's unfortunate, but not my responsibility. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But what might interest you more at this point is knowing that Sapphire Bay Resort is no longer a potential acquisition target for your development plans. I slid the final and most important document across the table, the deed showing Blue Horizon LLC's ownership of the resort property, with an attached certification identifying me as the LLC's controlling member. I am the majority owner of this entire resort, I stated clearly. Have been for the past 3 months. Your plan to demolish it for luxury condos is no longer viable, regardless of how many individual units you might acquire. The silence that followed was absolute. Ryan stared at the document, then at me, his expression shifting from shock to disbelief to something I'd rarely seen on his face, genuine fear. That's not possible, he stammered. You can't afford something like that. You're just a corporate employee. You've never actually understood what I do, have you? I asked quietly. Or perhaps you've never cared to learn. I've spent 15 years building a career in investment management. Did you really think I was just pushing papers at a desk job? Preston Harrington examined the deed documents with growing resignation. His attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but Preston waved him off. It appears I've been pursuing a property that's no longer available, he said finally. A simple phone call could have clarified this situation and saved everyone considerable time. A simple phone call from my brother explaining he was trying to sell my property without authorization would indeed have saved everyone time, I agreed. Unfortunately, that call never came. Preston stood abruptly. "I believe our business here is concluded. Mr. Reynolds, we'll be discussing your misrepresentation separately. My attorney will be in touch." With that, he gathered his documents and strode from the room, his attorney hurrying after him. Ryan remained seated, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. The witnesses along the side of the room had observed the entire exchange in silence, but now began quietly exiting, sensing the coming conversation should be private. As the door closed behind the last witness, Ryan finally spoke. "So this was all a setup? To what, humiliate me? Prove you're smarter and more successful? You always need to win, don't you, Madison?" "This wasn't about winning," I replied. "This was about stopping you from committing fraud using my property." "I was trying to help you," he exploded, slamming his hand on the table. "That condo sits empty most of the time while you play big shot executive in San Francisco. I found you a buyer willing to pay almost double what you paid. A normal sister would be grateful. A normal brother would ask permission before showing a property he doesn't own. A normal brother wouldn't forge signatures or lie to potential buyers." "You've never understood what it's like," Ryan continued, his voice rising. "Growing up in your shadow, hearing, 'Why can't you be more like Madison?' my entire life. Perfect Madison with her perfect grades and perfect job and perfect life." I stared at him, genuinely puzzled. "Is that really how you remember our childhood? Mom and Dad constantly made excuses for your behavior while holding me to impossible standards. You were the golden child who could do no wrong." Ryan laughed bitterly. "Is that what you think? They only paid attention to you. Every accomplishment, every decision, it was always about Madison. I was just the afterthought." The realization that we had experienced the same family through completely different lenses momentarily stunned me. Had we both felt overlooked in different ways? Was this the root of our dysfunctional relationship as adults? But the moment of potential understanding passed quickly as Ryan's anger resurfaced. "So what happens now? You report me to the police? Get my license revoked? Destroy my career to prove your point?" "That depends on you," I said honestly. "I have all the evidence needed for both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. But that's not what I want." "What do you want then? Money?" "I don't have any, as you've so thoroughly investigated." "I want you to take responsibility for your actions," I replied. "No excuses, no blaming me or circumstances or anyone else. Just acknowledge what you did and why it was wrong." Ryan stared at me in disbelief. "That's it? A simple 'I'm sorry' and all is forgiven?" I didn't say anything about forgiveness. That would require genuine remorse and changed behavior, neither of which I'm seeing at this moment. But it would be a start. He stood and straightened his jacket, some of his habitual bravado returning. "You've always been so self-righteous. Enjoy your little power trip, Madison. I'm sure Mom and Dad will be thrilled to hear how you've humiliated their son." "They'll hear the truth," I said simply. "How they process it is up to them. But this pattern ends today, Ryan. The manipulation, the deception, the expectation that you can behave however you want, without consequences, it's over." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. For a brief moment, I thought I glimpsed uncertainty in his expression, perhaps even a flicker of shame. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by the defensive mask he'd worn since adolescence. "Congratulations on your big resort purchase," he said sarcastically. "I guess money really can buy anything except a real family." With that parting shot, he left the conference room, the door closing behind him with a decisive click that seemed to mark the end of one chapter in our complicated relationship and the uncertain beginning of another. I remained seated at the conference table, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal and my response to it. The confrontation had gone largely as planned in terms of stopping the fraudulent sale and revealing the truth. But the emotional aftermath felt messier and less resolved than I had anticipated. As Jessica entered the room some minutes later, she found me still sitting there, staring at the resort deed that had proven so pivotal in today's events. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I stopped the fraud, but I don't think I fixed anything in terms of family. Some breaks need time to heal," she suggested, "and some need to be properly reset before they can." Her words resonated with unexpected wisdom. Perhaps this confrontation, painful as it was, represented the necessary resetting of a long-broken relationship. Whether healing would follow remained to be seen. My phone rang at 6:15 the following morning. Seeing Mom on the caller ID, I braced myself for the conversation I'd been anticipating since Ryan stormed out of yesterday's meeting. "Madison Ann Reynolds," my mother began, her voice tight with emotion. "What on earth is going on?" "Ryan called us last night absolutely distraught. Something about you humiliating him in a business meeting? Setting him up?" I moved to my condo balcony, watching the early morning fog roll across the ocean as I carefully considered my response. "Mom, I need you to listen to the complete story before forming any judgments. Can you do that?" "I'm listening," she replied, though her tone suggested she'd already taken sides. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically detailed Ryan's scheme, the unauthorized access to my property, the forged signatures, the planned sale without my knowledge or consent. I explained the evidence Samantha had gathered and the legal implications of his actions. I didn't editorialize or express anger. I simply presented the facts as clearly and unemotionally as possible. The silence on the other end of the line grew increasingly heavy as I continued. When I finally finished, I heard my mother take a shaky breath. "Ryan said you were exaggerating, that it was just a misunderstanding about whether he had permission to list the condo." "I have documentation proving otherwise," I replied gently. "Emails, security footage, witness statements. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Mom. It was fraud." "But why wouldn't you just call him directly when you found out? Did you have to embarrass him in front of potential clients?" The familiar pattern of excusing Ryan's behavior while holding me to a different standard sparked a flash of frustration, but I kept my voice steady. His actions had serious legal implications. I needed to address them formally and create a clear record of what happened. But you're right that I could have handled it differently. I made the choice I thought was necessary given the circumstances. Another lengthy silence followed before Mom spoke again. "Your father and I need time to process this. Ryan's version was quite different." "I understand," I said. "Take whatever time you need. I'm willing to have a conversation with both of you and Ryan together when everyone's ready." After ending the call, I sat watching the waves for a long time, feeling the complex mix of emotions I'd been suppressing during the confrontation and its immediate aftermath. Relief at having stopped the fraud. Disappointment in my brother's choices. Sadness for my parents, caught between their children in a situation with no simple resolution. And underneath it all, a strange sense of liberation as though a burden I hadn't fully acknowledged had finally been set down. The professional consequences for Ryan began unfolding that same day. By afternoon, his real estate broker had called to inform him that his license was being suspended pending investigation. Preston Harrington's attorney filed notification of a lawsuit for fraudulent misrepresentation. Several of Ryan's active listings were reassigned to other agents in his office, as word of the situation spread through professional circles. I chose not to pursue criminal charges, a decision Marcus questioned from a legal standpoint but respected as my personal choice. "Family complications aside," he advised, "you should at least file a civil complaint to create a formal record of the incident. This protects you if similar situations arise in the future." I followed his recommendation, filing the necessary paperwork but specifying that I wasn't seeking monetary damages beyond legal costs. The action was protective rather than punitive, a distinction that mattered to me even if it might seem irrelevant to Ryan. The most unexpected call came 3 days after the confrontation. I was reviewing renovation plans for the resort's restaurant when my phone displayed Dad on the screen. "Hi, Dad," I answered, surprised by his direct contact. He typically let Mom handle family communications. "Madison." His voice sounded older than I remembered. "I've been going through the documents you sent us. The evidence against Ryan is substantial." "Yes," I agreed simply, waiting for him to continue. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said after a moment. "We realize we may have enabled certain patterns of behavior over the years. Not just with Ryan, but in how we treated both of you differently." The admission, however carefully phrased, was more than I'd ever expected from my father. "That's a difficult realization to come to," I acknowledged. "We're starting family counseling next week," he continued. "It would be helpful if you could join some sessions, even remotely." "I'd be willing to do that," I said, genuinely moved by their willingness to examine long-standing family dynamics. "And Madison?" Dad added before ending the call. "The resort ownership, That's impressive. Really impressive. I wish you'd felt you could share that accomplishment with us. His words lingered long after we said goodbye. Perhaps the painful confrontation with Ryan had created an unexpected opening for more authentic communication with my parents. The local response to my revealed ownership of the resort unfolded gradually. Jessica managed the disclosure carefully, first informing key staff members, then allowing the information to spread naturally through the community. Rather than creating distance, as I'd feared, the revelation seemed to strengthen my connection to Sapphire Bay. People appreciate that you invested in preserving the resort rather than selling to developers, Jessica explained during our weekly management meeting. The fact that you kept it quiet makes it seem less like a power move and more like a genuine commitment to the community. Walter expressed similar sentiments when I ran into him on my morning walk. Always figured you were different from the typical investor types, he commented with a knowing nod. Too interested in local stories to be just passing through. Not all reactions were positive, of course. Some employees worried about potential changes under my ownership, despite my assurances that the resort's character would be preserved. A few condo owners expressed concern about property values if luxury development was permanently off the table. These perspectives were valid and required ongoing dialogue rather than dismissal. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Aunt Carol appeared unexpectedly at my door. As my mother's older sister, she had always maintained a certain independence from family politics, making her a natural mediator during Reynolds' disagreements. "Your mother asked me to come," she admitted as I served coffee on the balcony. "She's trying to understand both sides, but it's difficult for her. I know she loves Ryan," I acknowledged. "I'm not asking her to choose between us." "No, but you are asking her to see him clearly, perhaps for the first time," Carol observed. "That's its own kind of pain for a parent." We talked for hours that afternoon, covering not just the recent events but the long history of family dynamics that had created the conditions for such a profound breach of trust. Carol listened without judgment, occasionally offering insights from her outside perspective that helped me view certain patterns with fresh understanding. "Ryan texted me last night," I told her as our conversation wound down, his first communication since the confrontation. "What did he say?" she asked. It was strange, half apology, half self-justification. "I shouldn't have done it that way, but you have to understand my situation." Classic Ryan, really. Carol smiled sadly. "Baby steps, perhaps. At least he's acknowledging something wasn't right." "Maybe," I conceded, though I remained skeptical of any real change in my brother's perspective. As May turned to June, life at Sapphire Bay settled into a new pattern. I reduced my hours at the investment firm to spend more time actively managing the resort. The initial renovation plans progressed, focusing on sustainable updates that would improve guest experience while preserving the property's character. Local business owners began approaching me with ideas for partnerships that would strengthen the community's economic base beyond tourism. The most difficult day came in mid-June when my parents visited California for the first time in over a decade. Their counseling sessions had apparently been productive enough that they felt ready for an in-person conversation about recent events. We met at a neutral location, a restaurant midway between Sapphire Bay and the airport, rather than at my condo with its complicated associations. The conversation was stilted at first, weighted by unspoken tensions and years of established patterns. But gradually, as appetizers gave way to entrees and then dessert, something shifted. My father asked genuine questions about my investment strategy for the resort. My mother expressed pride in my business acumen without immediately following it with an update on Ryan's latest activities. We didn't solve everything in one dinner, but we established a foundation for more honest communication moving forward. "We've invited Ryan to join us for family therapy next month," Mom mentioned as we waited for the check. "He hasn't committed yet, but the invitation stands." "That's good," I replied, genuinely hoping he would accept. Despite everything, he was still my brother, and the possibility of a healthier relationship in the future remained important to me. As summer progressed, the legal consequences of Ryan's actions reached their resolution. The civil complaint was settled with a consent agreement, acknowledging the wrongdoing without requiring financial restitution. Preston Harrington dropped his lawsuit after Ryan issued a formal apology and agreed to certain professional restrictions. The State Real Estate Commission issued a 6-month license suspension rather than permanent revocation, providing a path for eventual return to practice. Throughout this period, I maintained a careful distance from Ryan, neither pursuing contact nor rejecting his occasional text messages. The space seemed necessary for both of us, giving him time to face the consequences of his actions without my intervention, and giving me time to process the complex emotions surrounding his betrayal. By late August, as Sapphire Bay prepared for the transition to fall season, I had reached a place of unexpected equilibrium. The resort was thriving under the new management structure, with occupancy rates rising and guest reviews reflecting appreciation for the thoughtful updates. My relationship with my parents, while still evolving, had found a more authentic foundation. And my own sense of belonging at Sapphire Bay had deepened through the crisis, transforming what began as a vacation property into a genuine home. The confrontation had been necessary, painful, but ultimately clarifying. Whether it would lead to reconciliation with Ryan remained uncertain, but I had done what was needed to protect myself and the community I'd come to value. For now, that knowledge provided its own form of peace. 6 months after the confrontation in the resort conference room, Sapphire Bay had transformed in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The physical changes were the most obvious: the freshly painted exterior in coastal blues and whites, the renovated lobby with its locally sourced artwork, the restaurant's expanded outdoor seating overlooking the ocean. But the deeper transformation was in the resort's relationship with the community and my own relationship with Sapphire Bay. What had begun as a private investment to protect my vacation property had evolved into a genuine commitment to sustainable local development. Working closely with Jessica and the Murphys, we'd implemented a renovation plan that prioritized character over luxury, authenticity over trends. The improved facilities attracted new guests while maintaining affordability for the families who had vacationed at Sapphire Bay for generations. Bookings are up 30% compared to last year, Jessica reported during our monthly management meeting, and the guest feedback specifically mentions the charming character and non-corporate feel as reasons they chose us over the chain hotels. My professional life had undergone equally significant changes. After discussions with my firm's partners, I'd transitioned to a senior advisory role that required just 20 hours weekly rather than the 60+ I'd maintained for years. This arrangement allowed me to split my time between San Francisco and Sapphire Bay, with increasing weeks spent at the latter. My condo, once a periodic escape from corporate pressure, had become my primary residence. I'd wake early to walk the beach, greet staff members by name as I passed through the resort grounds, and spend evenings on my balcony watching sunset colors paint the ocean. The simplicity of this routine provided a contentment I hadn't experienced during my achievement-focused years in finance. The resort's improved financial position allowed for community initiatives I'd only vaguely envisioned when acquiring the property. We established a scholarship program for local students pursuing hospitality management or environmental studies, funded through a portion of resort profits. The restaurant began sourcing ingredients exclusively from farms within 50 miles, supporting regional agriculture while reducing our carbon footprint. During off-season months, we offered reduced-rate accommodations for teachers and first responders, small gestures of appreciation that strengthened our community connections. Perhaps the most meaningful development was the healing process within my family. My parents had continued their counseling sessions, gradually moving from crisis management to deeper examination of long-established patterns. Our weekly phone calls, once perfunctory exchanges of surface information, had evolved into genuine conversations about thoughts and feelings that had gone unexpressed for decades. "Your father and I were discussing our parenting approaches yesterday," Mom shared during one such call. "We realized how differently we treated you and Ryan, holding you to impossible standards while making excuses for his behavior. It wasn't fair to either of you." This level of self-reflection would have been unimaginable before the confrontation forced certain truths into the open. While painful, the crisis had created space for growth that might otherwise never have occurred. Ryan's journey proved more complicated. After the initial legal consequences settled, he disappeared from family communication for nearly 2 months. My parents received occasional cryptic texts, assuring them he was figuring things out, but provided no details about his location or activities. I respected his need for space, neither pursuing contact nor blocking the possibility. The first meaningful communication came via email 3 months after the confrontation. The message was brief but significant. I've been in an outpatient program dealing with gambling addiction and some other issues. Part of the process involves making amends where possible. I know a simple apology doesn't cover what happened, but it's where I need to start. I'm sorry for violating your trust and property. No excuses or justifications. It was wrong, full stop. I'm working on understanding why I did it and how to make different choices going forward. Ryan. I waited a day before responding, wanting to ensure my reaction came from genuine reflection rather than automatic forgiveness or lingering anger. Thank you for your message. I appreciate the apology and your commitment to addressing the underlying issues. This will take time to process, but I'm open to conversation when you feel ready. Madison. The exchange marked a tentative first step toward whatever our relationship might become in the future. Neither of us harbored illusions about immediate reconciliation or returning to previous patterns. This would be something new, built on different foundations than our childhood rivalry or adult estrangement. In the weeks that followed, Ryan sent occasional updates about his progress in therapy and a career transition he was exploring outside of real estate. I shared appropriate information about my life and the resort, without pressure for deeper engagement. We were feeling our way forward cautiously, both aware of the broken trust that needed rebuilding. 5 months after the confrontation, Ryan asked if he could visit Sapphire Bay. Not to stay at the resort, he clarified in his message. I've booked a room in town, but I'd like to talk in person if you're comfortable with that. We met at a coffee shop on the town's Main Street neutral territory that avoided the emotional associations of either the resort or my condo. The initial awkwardness gradually eased as we moved from careful pleasantries to more substantive conversation. I've been working with my therapist to understand why I did what I did, Ryan said, turning his coffee cup slowly between his palms. Beyond the immediate financial pressure, I mean. The deeper motivations. What have you discovered? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. It sounds simplistic, but I was jealous, he admitted. Not just of your success, but of how complete your life seemed. You built something meaningful entirely on your own terms. Meanwhile, I was still defining myself by what I could get away with, like when we were kids. The insight surprised me with its self-awareness, a quality Ryan had rarely demonstrated in our adult interactions. That couldn't have been easy to recognize. It wasn't, he agreed with a rueful smile, especially since I spent so many years convincing myself I was the charming, fun sibling while you were just uptight and boring. Easier than admitting you were actually building something worthwhile while I was just coasting. We talked for nearly 3 hours that afternoon, covering territory we'd never explored in our decades as siblings. The conversation wasn't magically healing too much, had happened for such a simple resolution, but it established a foundation for potential reconciliation based on truth rather than performance or manipulation. As Ryan prepared to leave, he mentioned he'd been offered a position with a nonprofit focusing on affordable housing development, a significant departure from his previous career path. Lower salary than real estate at its peak, but steady work doing something that actually matters. Plus, they're willing to hire me despite the license suspension, which not many places are. That sounds promising, I said, genuinely glad to hear he was finding a constructive path forward. I don't expect immediate trust, he acknowledged as we parted. I know that needs to be earned back gradually, if it's even possible. It's possible, I assured him. Different than before, but possible. 2 weeks later, my parents called with the suggestion that inspired our most ambitious family experiment yet, celebrating their upcoming anniversary with a weekend at Sapphire Bay Resort. Neutral territory for everyone, Dad explained, and we'd finally get to see this place you've invested in. The prospect of hosting my entire family, including Ryan at the resort, created both anxiety and hope. Jessica helped arrange accommodations that balanced privacy with opportunities for shared experiences. The Murphys offered to host a special dinner celebrating both my parents' anniversary and the resort's renewed prosperity. Various staff members, knowing pieces of the family story through community grapevine, quietly assured me of their support during the visit. Yesterday, my family gathered at Sapphire Bay for the first time. The initial moments were undeniably tense, with all of us hyper-aware of potential friction points. But as the weekend progressed, something unexpected emerged, glimpses of the family we might have been without the dysfunctional patterns that had defined our relationships for decades. Mom expressed genuine curiosity about the resort operations without immediately comparing my choices to Ryan's. Dad asked thoughtful questions about the renovation process, actually listening to my answers rather than offering unsolicited advice. Ryan participated appropriately without dominating conversations or seeking center stage. And I found myself relaxing into the gathering rather than maintaining the hypervigilance that had characterized family interactions throughout my adult life. During the anniversary dinner, Tom Murphy raised a toast not just to my parents but to the resort's journey from potential demolition to renewed vitality. Sometimes the most valuable things are those we almost lose before recognizing their true worth, he observed, the comment resonating beyond its immediate context to the family healing tentatively taking place. This morning, sitting on my condo balcony watching the sunrise paint the ocean in gold and rose, I reflected on the unlikely journey from that shocking moment at my mother's birthday dinner to the present day. Ryan's attempt to sell my property without authorization could have resulted in permanent family estrangement, criminal charges, and lasting bitterness. Instead, through difficult conversations and genuine efforts at understanding, it had become a catalyst for transformation, painful but ultimately constructive. The lesson wasn't that betrayal should be easily forgiven or that family loyalty should supersede personal boundaries. Rather, it was that confronting hard truths, however uncomfortable, creates possibilities for authentic connection that cannot exist amid pretense and unacknowledged patterns. My sanctuary was no longer defined by property ownership or physical space, though my condo remained a cherished haven. The deeper sense of belonging came from community connections, meaningful work, and relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or performance. Even my relationship with Ryan, while still evolving and necessarily bounded by new awareness of his capabilities for deception, contained possibilities for genuine brotherhood that our previous dynamics had never allowed. As I prepare to join my family for breakfast in the resort restaurant, I'm reminded that true resolution rarely arrives in dramatic confrontations or single conversations. It emerges gradually through consistent choices, maintained boundaries, and willingness to see others clearly while remaining open to connection. The story of my brother's attempted betrayal and its consequences continues to unfold, each day adding new understanding to what came before. The resort thrives, the community strengthens, and family relationships heal at their own pace. In this continuing journey lies the most valuable lesson of all, that endings are rarely as final as they appear, and new beginnings often emerge from what we thought was irreparable damage. In the debris of broken trust, we found building materials for something new, something imperfect, but honest, fragile, but real. As I join my family for one more breakfast before they return to Connecticut, I understand that our story doesn't have a neat, dramatic conclusion. There's no perfect moment of forgiveness or redemption that solves everything. Instead, there's the daily work of showing up, setting boundaries, and choosing how to engage with one another. Sometimes the best revenge isn't the satisfaction of watching someone else fall, but the realization that their actions led you to build something stronger than before. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone's betrayal actually led to positive changes in your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Family dynamics are complex, and sometimes the most healing discussions come from sharing our experiences with others who understand. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more true family stories. Your support means everything as I continue sharing these personal journeys. And remember, sometimes the people who try to take what's yours don't realize they're actually setting you up to reveal how much more you truly own. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength and clarity in your own family relationships.